Welcome to the NYU Steinhardt Jazz Interview Series. And today I'd like to welcome the great Lenny White.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you.
Lenny, I want to go right in to hitting you with some concepts of how you think. I want to get into your brain today a little bit. And from your years of experience, what does it mean to be a musician?
Well, my definition of a musician is someone who plays music, and all kinds of music. I think it's someone who has taken whatever time they've had to aspire to get to a particular level to be called a musician, so somebody who actually can play music. And in the in space of the community, he or she serves a purpose. Again, it gets back to music. A musician plays music, serves the purpose of spreading music throughout the community or society. And for me, it's been a great privilege to be able to do that.
There's the idea of the musician, but there's also the concept of living the life as an artist. And a lot of people put that concept down. It's like, we don't need artists. We have to figure out a way to develop opportunities for people to earn substantial careers and substantial sums of money and live the American dream of a house and a garage and two-car garage and all that stuff. How does that gel with your concept?
My concept is inclusive of all of that. I mean, when I became obsessed with music, and it was my goal to be a working musician, I actually wasn't thinking about making money. I thought about rising to a particular level to be able to call myself a musician. And there was a joy that I got in actually playing music and having people accept what it is that I did and having people call me a musician. And early on in my pursuit of being a musician, I was kind of directed certain ways. There were certain kinds of music that I liked. And my concept wasn't inclusive of all kinds of music. It was directed to certain kinds of music. So, I wanted to be, that kind of a musician and play that kind of music. It was later on in my life or career as a musician that I became a little bit more inclusive with all kinds of musics. And in doing that, and how society views what it is that you do and how they maybe put a little bit more acceptance on this part of what it is you do with that, and you're able to earn a living doing that, then there are other kind of values. Oh, wow, you want to aspire to be, famous or rich, or do things like that. But in the very beginning, I just wanted to play music. And in doing that, that kind of really shaped what it is and my concept about doing that. And my concept has always been to play the best that I could play and reach as many people as I could. The money aspect and the fame aspect is something that after you become successful at doing something, those things come in. But I just wanted to always be a musician and play good music and play with Miles Davis.
Well, we'll get to that in a little bit. But do you think it's more difficult now to have a vision if you have a passion to be a musician, a creative person, it's more difficult to pursue that goal?
I don't think that it's hard. I think that it's become convoluted. I think that when you have these shows like American Idol and America's Got Talent and The Voice, I think it's convoluted what people think, people's concepts of musicians. So in terms of having a vision, I think the vision has been convoluted to the point where if what you're shown on TV, if that's the concept of being a musician, people will strive for that. If they watch TV and this is shown 5 times a week, that's what they aspire to do, because it's shown to them all the time. So it's become, as I said, convoluted. I mean, someone who doesn't watch TV and still has the aspirations of becoming a musician may have a clearer vision of what it is that he or she wants to do. But TV has a lot to do with how people's perceptions are channeled. And so I can't say that it's a hard thing to do, but I think it's become more convoluted for people to have an actual vision about what it is they'd like to do.
Well, if television and maybe the internet focuses on a certain style or genre, whatever is popular at the moment, you've been around for so many years now and have worked with so many different groups. How do people find you, find music that they may not be aware of, which is the perfect fit for them?
Well, first off, I think that it's the responsibility of that person to want to do that. It's the responsibility of that person to want or to like or follow a musician close enough to say, I'd like to find out more about him or her and where they came from and how the music that they play was shaped. If that's the case and they want to do that, there are great libraries of musics, different kinds of musics, that they're able to do that. Plus, with the internet and YouTube and everything, and everybody now that goes to a concert has their phone and, is taping whatever it is that the musicians are playing. But there's a great wealth of opportunities and volumes to find this other music, but it has to come from the person that they want to do that, and they just search for that.
Now, when I first got to know you a few months ago, you were telling me about you came down to school and you wanted to see what was going on, because I hired you to teach on my faculty at NYU, and you come into my office and you said, what would you like me to do? And I said, well, I'd like you to teach drums, but beyond that, I'd like you to prepare our students to figure out how to develop an inspired and creative life. And at that point, you said you were in. So, how's that going? What did what I say spur you on to say, yes, this is what I'm interested in doing?
Well, quite honestly, if you've been doing something for a great period of time and you have some extensive knowledge about it, it's best to share that knowledge. And outside of an actual faculty higher learning institution, I do this all the time. I mean, with young musicians that I have in my groups, or that ask me to come and talk with them about it. That's what I do. I talk about things and teach. And so when you gave me the opportunity to do that, it was just great, because now it's in a legitimate setting that you're able to do that. I personally think that the way the music that we talk about, if you want to quote unquote jazz music, should be learned is a hands-on situation. Musicians learn that. The way I learned it is by playing with masters in a live setting. And so the more inclusive the faculties get in terms of having master musicians that actually played the music and helped create the music, when they become part of the faculty and they're outreaching to the students, I think that's what's necessary and that's what's needed. And I think that's the true way that the music should be taught, and the way the music has been taught forever. When Miles Davis came to New York to study at Juilliard, he didn't come to study Juilliard to play jazz. He went out and found Charlie Parker, and that's how he learned to play jazz.
Well, with the change in culture and the lack of those road musicians and the opportunity to grow and be mentored on the road, I think sometimes, in our case, the mentors are now within the university. And that's the learning experience. In fact, you know, my father always used to say the big bands are coming back, and I believe they never left. They just moved to the universities, right? So, in a sense, what you're doing is mentoring your students in the process of being better musicians, but also better informed artists and developing a career path.
Yeah, you know, that's how I learned. I mean, like, as a drummer coming up in New York City, I had the opportunity to meet all of my heroes. My heroes in terms of jazz drumming are the Magnificent Seven. The Magnificent Seven are Art Blakey, Max Roach, Philly Joe Jones, Elvin Jones, Roy Haynes.
Papa Joe Jones?
No. Tony Williams and Kenny Clark. Those are the Magnificent Seven. For me, they were the progenitors of what modern jazz drumming was and still is. And I got an opportunity, with the exception of Kenny Clark, I got an opportunity to talk with all of them. And so they mentored me. And I learned the music hands-on that way, being able to go and see them play in clubs every night. What was kind of interesting is that these are all the musicians that I listened to, and they were in their heyday. I was a young drummer coming up in New York City, and in order for me to get gigs, I had to be good enough to play a gig that they didn't take, because they had all the gigs. So I got an opportunity to go see them all. So I knew that I had to raise my game in order to be able to play in a club in New York City, because all those guys had all the gigs. It wasn't a situation where, like, those people had passed and you just listened to them on records. No, they were alive and vibrant and honing their craft at the same time.
Were these drummers approachable? Did you find that they were direct with you with comments?
Yes. And that's what was a great privilege, and I think that that's what's missing somewhat today. But all those guys were approachable. And, you know, it wasn't just listening to a record. You got to go see Art Blakey and afterwards you go and you ask them, I mean, I wasn't supposed to be in the club, I was kind of young, but and then they say, hey, you know, and they sit and talk with you, and that was special. And, you know, and that's something that stays with you forever. And that perspective and that thing which was special to me, I'd like to be able to share with other young musicians too. And so I do have somewhat of an opportunity like that now, being at NYU.
So there's actually a lineage happening. It's like the people that you learn from, and you've become you based on those people, your personality, your sense of humor, your sense of direction. It may be based on what Art Blakey or Philly Joe or said to you at one point that sparked this idea of this is how I need to move forward.
The way that the best way I could explain it is like I was in Europe maybe about, I don't know, 10 years ago, and I played a concert, and there were some young musicians that came up to me afterwards and said, it's really special to be able to see you and talk to you live, because now history becomes alive, because we just saw you on a video or saw your name on a page, but now you're actually physically here talking to us, and so history becomes real and it's alive, because someone that she's not dead is really alive, and that I've studied and listened to actually is now in front of me talking. So that kind of resonated, and the opportunity that I have to be able to talk to people now and do that, and have at least students come and ask me questions, because that's the way you learn. You learn by asking questions.
Have you ever been in a situation where you wanted to meet somebody and they say, "Get away from me, kid"?
Yeah. No. Okay. That fortunately for me, no. I tell this story. I've told this story a lot, but when I met Philly Joe Jones, I said that all my heroes were alive and playing when I was still coming up playing and trying to get my foot in the door here in New York City. And it just so happens that a great saxophone player, my friend at the time, Steve Grossman and I would go around clubs and sit in, and we would do our John Coltrane, Elvin Jones imitation. We thought that we sounded like Train and Elvin. And so Art Blakey was playing at the Village Vanguard, and he let us sit in and play. So we played, and we thought that we sounded really great. And I went back into the kitchen, and Philly Joe was back there, and he said, "Yeah, Len, you sounded something." I was like, so he was picking up my face, And about a year later, I was playing with Freddie Hubbard at the Village Vanguard. And Freddie was turning around and saying, "Hey, man, you're playing too loud. You're playing too loud." And so I went back into the kitchen after the set, and Philly Joe was back there again. He said, "Yeah, Len, now that's what I'm talking about. Yeah, I used to make Miles' lips bleed. Yeah, that's what you're supposed to do, So I was vindicated. So the fact is that I got an opportunity to talk with these guys that were my heroes, and they said this or said that about my playing, and said that this is what you need to do or you shouldn't do that. That was very important for me. And so I try to do the same thing with my young students also.
Now, I'd heard you talk about your experience playing on the Bitches Brew record with Miles Davis and how he spoke to you rather abstractly.
Well, you see, Miles was a master. He knew exactly what he wanted. And I think the difference between a band leader who told everybody what to do is Miles hired people that he thought would be able to bring whatever it is that he wanted to his band. It's a big, different dynamic. So he would hire somebody and not tell them what to play, because the reason why he hired them was because he heard something in their playing, and that's what he thought should happen in his band. So when I got the opportunity to do Bitches Brew, it was a very interesting scenario because it was a pretty large ensemble. There were 4 percussion players, 2 people that played percussion and 2 played drum sets. Jack DeJohnette and I played drum kit, and Don Elias played percussion, and Juma Santos played percussion. And so I had played with 2 drummers before. Actually, how I got the opportunity to do the gig with to play that, make that record, is I was playing in Jamaica, Queens, where I'm from, in a club called the Aphrodisiac. And it was Benny Maupin and Rashid Ali. I forgot who the other players were, but there was a trumpet player that knew Miles. And so when we played, he said, "Man, has Miles ever heard you play?" I said, "No." He said, "Man, I'm going to tell him about you." I said, "Yeah, right, whatever, you know." And so he did, and I got a call. So it wasn't like I hadn't played with 2 drummers before. I had done that. And so for me, my concept was to make it sound like one drummer that had 8 arms. And so I wanted to try to actually fit in, you know, and make it sound like a congruous thing. And he came to me and he said, I never forget, he said, Jack had on some sunglasses. Well, actually, how the whole session started, you know, I did a rehearsal at his house. It was Jack, Chick, Dave Holland, and Wayne. And all we rehearsed was the beginning of Bitches Brew. Doodle doo, doodle doo. You know, he said, "All I want you to bring is a snare drum and a cymbal." So I had snare drum and cymbal, and that's all we rehearsed. So then he said, "Be at Columbia Studios at 10 a.m. So I was there at 9:30. A cleaning lady let me in, and so I'm setting up my stuff, and all the guys are coming in. Now, this is the first record that I ever made. So for me, it was like, wow, man, I'm actually doing this for real. This is, yeah. Anyway, so I'm setting up my stuff and I'm practicing, you know, and Jack comes in and he's sitting next. So Miles comes in and over the the talkback, he presses down and said, "Hey, Jack." Jack said, "Yeah, Miles." Said, "Tell the young drummer to shut up." So right away, I'm intimidated, you know. But he comes and he says to me, he says, "Think of this as like a big pot, a big stew. And I want you to be a spice, like you get the salt and do that. So just let it percolate and you do this, do that to make it change, do something different, you know." And that was the only instruction that he gave me. Actually, he reprimanded me because we were playing Miles Runs the Voodoo Down, and I got an opportunity to listen to outtakes of it years after the record came out. There's a guy that was doing a book on Bitches Brew, and I went into the studio with him, and I heard all of the takes without any editing or anything. And, you know, I listened back to Miles Runs the Voodoo Down. It sounded pretty good to me. I mean, like, it was, but he wanted something that was, I guess, funky. And so he said, "You ain't getting the chicken." And I was like, oh. And so Don Elias said, "Hey, Miles, I got a beat that I think would work." And he played this real simple beat. And I was like, I outthought myself because I thought that Miles wanted, you know, some real slick stuff because, I was a big Tony Williams fan, and I thought that's what he wanted. But that wasn't what he wanted. And so I wound up playing percussion on that tune. And so when the session was over that day, I was like sitting over in the corner, and I was kind of like despondent. And he came over to me and said, "What's wrong?" I said, "Well, I really wanted to." He said, No, don't worry about that. Be here tomorrow at 10 o'clock, And so I learned a great lesson that day. And, as a young musician, or as any musician, when you get into a situation like that, you should really find out what's needed and wanted by the leader. And don't assume anything, find out what's needed and wanted, and when you do that, then that's what you should do. And so I learned that. And, it was a good lesson for me at that point.
Last week I was listening to an interview on YouTube with Wayne Schroeder. Actually, he was giving a lecture, and he was talking about how he reads a lot of fantasy books and comic books and such, and he made the statement that maybe fantasy is the reality, and what we think is reality and what we're told to pursue as people on this planet may not necessarily be a true direction. I know that you're very close to a group of musicians like Wayne Schroeder, Herbie Hancock, Stanley Clarke, Chick Corea, and I'm sure you guys don't sit around and talk about chord changes and forms and this and that, but you've moved your conversation and your interest to much more interesting, maybe abstract discussions on that include everything from plots of movies and fictitious characters and interesting fantasy books and stuff. How does that play out with how you deal with music and the creation of music and getting on stage and actually playing? Because I know when Wayne performs, he doesn't rehearse now. It's just getting up there, and it's a stream of consciousness with the group.
I think all of those things come into the actual art of creating. It's interesting because all of those people that you name, we talk about all those things that you made references to. If you think about Wayne Schroeder, who's such, to me, he's one of the greatest composers of the 20th century. And if you sit and talk with Wayne as you have, you can understand that by listening to the brilliant ways that he explains life things, but they're explained in such graphic and existential terms. And that's how he creates the music that he creates. He said to me, when he was thinking about footprints, and he had a bass line, do-do-do-do-ding. He said what he was thinking about is how a giant would walk, and then so the giant would go, do-do-do-do, do-do-do-do. And when you think about it, it makes perfect sense. You see the giant walking and then the last step like this. Yeah. But, like for instance, with Return to Forever, Romantic Warrior was the first thematic record that we made. All the other records had, Where Have I Known You Before was a poem that was written by Neville Potter, and there was different instances to that poem. But Romantic Warrior was a thematic record, meaning that there was an actual theme that went through the process of making the music. And we were thinking about groups like Yes and King Crimson, who had done records like that were thematic records. But for us, it was something that we had done for the first time. And in listening to all different kinds of musics, I mean, whether it was classical music or R&B or whatever, all those different kinds of things came into the creative process of how we made our music. And, you know, in talking with Herbie and stuff that he did with M1DC and then the Headhunters and all the different aspects of what goes on in a musician's life would bring, I mean, the musician would bring those things back to their music. And so it's all in the creative process that all these things get stirred around and come out like the way they do. Plus, social issues also come into factors. So, you know, we went through turbulent times back in the 60s and the 70s. I mean, everybody was changing, and America was no longer innocent, and the establishment was the enemy. And it was, everything that we did was counterculture. This is back when rock and jazz was counterculture. Now they've become mainstream, you know. So all those things actually help form the music, and they were changing styles, changing forms. All those things help stylize the music.
But you think the fact that jazz has become mainstream now, it's lost some of its power, some of its magic, because it's not attached to the social conscious like it was?
Yeah, I think it's changed. If you think about music and how Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Jimi Hendrix, James Brown, you think about Ornette Coleman, you know, Ornette. You think about music back then and how those guys shaped music, and then music after them. You can see a big difference. I mean, you think about Miles Davis and John Coltrane, the music that they created and the music that they made, and their approach to playing music was associated with jazz, and then it evolved. What their music was, if they played what was considered jazz in the 50s and in the 60s, and then you watch their transition of that music that they played and how that evolved into the 70s, into the 80s, you could see that there was a transition happening, but the spirit of those musicians was still vibrant and present. They're no longer here. That's changed. And the music and the attitude towards the music that's created now is totally different. I think that a lot of it is stylized and copied. But you know, the music back in the era of Miles and Train and Jimi Hendrix, and that was seminal music. What they did was seminal to the point that it has affected things past that. And I don't know who is doing that today.
What do you think of the idea of artists like Jimi Hendrix, Miles, Train? They were breaking new ground constantly. They were always looking for something else to do with their voice. Today we have a lot of people, especially through education, that are trying to sound like Jimi Hendrix, Train, and Miles, and pursue that path again. So in a sense, to revisit that, maybe copy, and find a career path that way. I don't know if that's good or bad, or it certainly brings the past back to the present, but how does that move the music forward?
Well, the fact is I think it would be a good thing if that was the case, that they were, I think for any musician, any young musician, they find who they really like or have an affinity for, and they can try to copy them and play through what it is their expression of how they think that they sound like that guy, whoever it is. And I think in the process of doing that, they find themselves. They find out who they are. When you try to play like somebody, you can't be that person because that's that person. But you can play like a particular artist that you like, and in playing like that artist, you find out who you are. You find out that, okay, yeah, I do it somewhat like that, but this is personal to me. But I think what's happened is, if those artists that I named were seminal artists and they were changing things at that time, I think we're like maybe 2 or 3 generations past that, and the guys who copied them are no longer. Now there's copies of the guys who copied that, and there was also a movement of not really going back to those seminal musicians, but going back before that to Duke Ellington and Louis Armstrong, which were fantastic musicians, and that's great, but that's like repertoire as opposed to forward advancing the music and doing something different with what was done. And I don't think there's enough of that that's happening in the new music today. I think that they're copying, the musicians today are copying people who copied somebody who copied somebody else.
On that same point, you'd mentioned that when you were a younger musician going from club to club sitting in, you were sitting in with Steve Grossman, who was probably around your same age group, right? And he was coming right out of hearing Coltrane. I don't know if you had a chance to check out Coltrane live, but he was like the next generation, the young bucks who were coming up and saying, "Wow, this is, I want to latch onto that." And here's the next possibility of that. I'm sure at a certain point he really copped Train, but it was probably new and interesting because of the new grooves that were happening as well, and the fusion thing that was happening. That Train didn't move into fusion. He found his other path, but it's like musicians like Mike Brecker too, they found ways to incorporate what Coltrane had been doing and move it into whatever Miles was doing now, for instance.
Well, it's very, very interesting to see, because Michael Brecker was one of my favorite musicians. He was a real great friend of mine. We played a lot together. And I know that everybody really is into the Coltrane-esque direction of Michael Brecker. But me talking to Michael Brecker, his guy was Stanley Turrentine. He did play, of course, anybody who played the saxophone after John Coltrane and Charlie Parker were influenced by them. But, you know, there's also Sonny Rollins, Sonny Stitt, Joe Henderson, Wayne Schroeder. There were a bunch of guys that were post-John Coltrane that all the young musicians in my era were listening to. And Michael was listening to all of them too. I know that there was a point that me playing with Joe Henderson, later on, after I had gone on and played with other people, that Joe actually was kind of angered that he thought that Michael Brecker had been listening to him too much. You know, but Michael Brecker, the rest of his soul, was one of my favorite musicians. And again, Steve Grossman, Michael Brecker, Dave Liebman were all coexisting at the same time. And, well, Miles had both Dave Liebman and Steve Grossman play with him. They had, and they both, Steve Grossman and Dave Liebman both played with Elvin Jones also. So, like, there was this Coltrane-esque movement. And Michael at the time was doing a lot of pop records and sessions. And then after that, he started to come back and play jazz again. And but it was after the fact. And in terms of John Coltrane not being, you said, in diffusion, he was in diffusion, but he lived through Steve Grossman, Michael Brecker, and Dave Liebman, because they all had carried the Coltrane legacy into this other music. The thing about which is interesting is that when you talk about jazz today, the thing that's put in between where Miles and Train did it and what it is today was fusion. And so this created a whole nother thing. And when Wayne Schroeder and Michael Brecker played that music, which was called fusion, it was jazz rock when we did it, their contributions and how the saxophone fit in that music, along with Benny Maupin too, was different than what jazz is today. And see, so sometimes when you asked about somebody copying what was done before, there's this this music that is in between those two periods. And along with fusion, then you have what Wynton was doing, which was repertoire. So, like, it's a little convoluted in terms of what the actual lineage, but the guys that had the actual lineage were Wayne Schroeder and Michael Brecker, because they were around enough earlier to know where the music really came from, and you could trace that music through their lineage and what it is that they did.
Now, connecting all this music into the larger popular world, you had Return to Forever, we had Weather Report, we had even the Red Clay album you're on with Freddie Hubbard, had elements that were appealing to other things that were going on in popular genre. So I think in a sense everybody was trying to connect with new music. Was it about that, or was it about that this music could be marketed and be sold rather than this is what we chose to do?
I think it was what we chose to do. See, the fact is that contrary to popular belief, a lot of different kinds of musics and art styles exist. They coexist at the same time. If a person is following a certain kind of music and that's what they listen to, they don't listen to anything. See, most musicians are not musically myopic. They're inclusive of, as I said, as a young musician, I was into whatever kind of music I was into at that time. And because of my youth, I wasn't musically inclusive. It was like I was focused on this. This is what I wanted to play. But as I got older, I saw that it was much more of it created much more of an effort to be inclusive of a whole lot of different kinds of musics. And I think that in doing that, I know Miles, he basically wanted to play his music his way, and it was his take on what was contemporary. So he created his version of what was contemporary music. With Red Clay, with Freddie Hubbard, he called me up and he said, would you like to are you open to do a record date? And I'm like, what, 20 years old. You know, I had recorded with Miles, but, you know, my head wasn't so big that, you know, this is Freddie Hubbard calling me and asking me to do a record. And I said, yeah, sure. I said, who's on it? So, like, okay, this is me on the telephone. And Freddie says, yeah, well, it's going to be Herbie Hancock, Joe Henderson, and Ron Carter. So, me talking to him saying, oh, yeah, I'm cool with that. But really on the phone, I'm going, I said, yeah, sure. So I get to the session, and it's at Rudy Van Gelder's, which is hallowed ground because they did A Love Supreme, they did Imperial Niles, Maiden Voyage, all the records that I listened to, you know, coming up. Rudy had done them at Rudy Van Gelder's, you know. I'm like, ah. So Freddie says, first I had this bass drum that I used on Bitches Brew, which was an oil can. It was actually an actual oil drum made from an oil drum, and it was pretty resonant. It was kind of cool, you know, and it had a sound. So I had my drums there, and I hit the bass drum, and Ron Carter said, no, you can't use that drum. I mean, no, the drum is too resonant, and like the way it's tuned, you won't hear no bottom notes of the bass. So Rudy went in the back and found this like 28-inch bass drum that had a painting of a moonlit lake on it, you know, and it sounded like, it was horrible, you know. So traumatically, I said, man, I have an opportunity to play with these guys. I got to play this horrible bass drum. So Freddie says, well, listen, I got this tune, man, and I need a beat. Let me tell you how it goes, and can you put a beat to it? So Ron played the bass line, and so I thought about it. And I just basically played what I thought would work with the bass line. And years later, Freddie would come to me all the time and say, hey, man, I owe you a lot, man, because that beat really made the record. And, like, you know, if it wasn't for you with that beat, man, I would have made the $1 million. No. But, you know, we were just playing our version of what we thought would be popular music. We didn't want to sell out and go all the way and play that. We wanted to be hip with what it is that we did and play some slick beats, or don't play corny chords, play some slick chords or something like that. So it was basically our version of what we thought would be popular.
Interesting. When I first met you and you started teaching here at NYU, you had said, I really like it here. You mind if I invite some of my friends to come down? And I said, well, I don't know, who are your friends? And it turned out that the first guy you invited was Chick Corea a few weeks ago. So you and Chick were sitting in the classroom, and you started making the conversation about the role of artists in the world. And maybe you can expound on what you said about what art and artists in performance do for listeners You remember you were saying that you're removed from reality and you're brought into a consciousness where you can relax. And
Yeah. I think artists in general, whether it's painters, authors, actors, musicians, artists are light bearers. Life generally is dark. Let me explain what I mean by light bearer. Like, if there's a particular jazz artist that you love, and you listen to an album of that artist, and there's a track on there that's 10 minutes long. For the 10 minutes that you listen to that track, you're transported to a place that, in your imagination, or you listening to it, you're in this Nirvana, you're in, what's it, Nirvana, right? Yeah, how do you say Nirvanic? Nirvanic? Oh, that's a new word. Huh?
let's call the whole thing off.
Right, okay. But you're taken to this place, and for that 10 minutes that you listen to this music, you forget about your cares, you forget about your mortgage, you forget about all those things, and you're in bliss. Same thing when you go to a movie, and for the 2 hours that you go and you are in this movie, you don't think about whatever cares you have. So you're transported, and this light comes into your life. So there's this obligation that artists have to do that as a part of society. And now it's gotten to the point where life has gotten so dark that it's not just artists, it's entertainers also. But, I think that it's a vaulted position that artists should have in society because of the fact that that's a service that they provide, and they do. And I don't think that they're vaulted enough, or they're thought about enough to do that, especially the way it is now. I mean, with now news has become something that you see all the time. It's in front of your face all the time, and that now competes also for the space that you have. So, something happens, or you're away from the TV for you got to go turn on CNN to see what's happening. I got to know what happened today, Before that, an artist would take you to a place where, like you say, okay, I had a bad day today, I want to relax, I'm going to put on some music, or I'm going to watch a movie or whatever. Now, news also is fit in there too. Okay, so after you listen to the music that's taking you, okay, now let me see what really happened today, But as an artist, I think that it's an actual privilege to be able to do that for society, and I take it very, very seriously. And I try to create things that will do that for whatever portion of society will have it and like it.
I mean, it's interesting when people would listen to music when they drove, they'd turn the radio on, and it would be maybe in the 60s, 70s, 80s, it'd be a wide range of things. You just find what you like, and all of a sudden your ride home is cool.
Yeah.
So it's not so much that way now.
No, it's become, when I was coming up, we listened to the radio for the particular DJ that was on the radio, because Joe Smith, whoever, played all these different kinds of things. So you tuned in to the Joe Smith show because he played a lot of different kinds of things. He could play the Beatles and Jimi Hendrix on the same station and throw in Miles Davis too. so it was that mindset to be able to be inclusive of different kinds of music is the reason why you would listen to a DJ. And FM, which was totally different than AM, FM played more progressive music. And so you got an opportunity to hear things that you would not hear on regular AM radio, regular pop radio. And radio has become really, really, I mean, there's like so many different channels that do just this or just this kind of music or just that kind of music. You can't listen to a station with it's inclusive of everything anymore. It's
and
not
that
like
really
that.
segregates that population. They become, I'm only following this or I'm only following that. You know, the other interesting thing we were discussing earlier was the demise of the record store, where you'd walk into a record store and you might have a Blue Note record stand or ECM or Capitol or Columbia, and it says, check this out. These are the things that are new or we're bringing back that you may not have heard that are seminal and essential to understand why we exist. Those things are gone now, so we have the internet where you have unlimited resources, but maybe very little direction.
Yeah, one of the other things that I think is I've come to observe, and that is like with jazz music. Jazz music was very conversational. See, you and I are sitting here having a conversation now, and there's no emphasis on just you or me. It's the both of us. And the fact that the conversation that we're having is interesting enough for people to say, oh, well, I like that conversation. But jazz music, that's what it is. You know, you have a soloist, but what is interesting is the conversation that the soloist has with all the other different people that are in the band, and then the conversations within the band and how they support the soloist. With pop music, the singer is the main point. The singer is the person who communicates with the audience. The audience gets into what the singer does, and all the musicians are there for support for the singer. That's the point, is the singer. And this conversational music perspective with the audience is no longer the thing anymore. And so with that, you do have this advent of stars and point people. There hardly are any bands anymore. It's the stars that are there. And so radio stations and internet directorials are for that. What is kind of interesting and which is good is that through the internet you do have some emphasis on bands that are more progressive. So I think that there is still this openness for this conversational music to come back. Not necessarily that it's jazz, but there are bands that are doing things that are like conversational music like jazz was. But you have to seek them out. This is what I said to you before. You do have many, many options. It's not like you don't have options, but you have to want to seek these options out. It's up to the individual to find these different things, because it's not put out there like that. You know, like for you to find alternate bands, you got to look for them. But there are alternative music bands that are happening, that are great.
You ever notice when you go to a performance, you're listening in the audience or you're playing, and it seems like 5 minutes has gone by, but it's really been an hour? And it's like, that's that zone you're talking about. You leave any issues you have with life, and you're in this comfort zone where you're taken for a ride. That's happened today because we've been talking for over an hour, and it seems like 10 minutes.
And we didn't talk about movies at all, man.
I know. Well, what advice do you have for musicians that are coming up, that maybe your students, maybe people watching this, that can learn from your lessons, if you have some comment?
Well, I mean, I think that I don't think there's one bit of advice. I think there's a lot of different things, but direction-wise, I think that first you have to really want to do this, and this means putting time and sacrificing different things into what it is that you're doing and in your direction. And in doing that, you need to go back, because now you do have the opportunity to go back. If there's someone that you really like as a musician that you feel is an influence, go back and find out who his or her influence was. You can go back all the way now, because there are libraries that you're able to do that. And you should learn as many songs as you can. Old songs, because when you do that and you learn that, then you learn song form and how, whether it's a popular song or jazz form or whatever, you need to learn as many songs as you can so you understand song form and structure, and learn your instrument the best that you can. And once you learn your instrument the best that you can, it'll help you express yourself the best that you can. And just have some fun. I mean, music is you're supposed to have fun with it, so.
But on top of that, finding your example here today, be articulate, be positive, be open, and those are the attributes that I've found. And be creative, be forward-thinking, and enjoy the whole process.
Oh yeah, because we are light bearers, and we do have to bring some light into people's dark lives.
I can't think of a better way to end than Mr. Lenny White, everyone.
Thank you.